Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest session of the NIH Project Futures Compass 22.1 event. My name is Matt Baker, and I'm the Corporate Benefits Lead for Health Education England. Just before I hand you over to Katie and Pete for this session, I'll just let you know the format of this virtual event. You'll see on the right-hand side of your screen the panel detailing chat, Q&A and feedback. The chat function allows you to chat as you would expect. The Q&A is for you to enter questions as you think of them, and also to vote on questions that have already been posed. Towards the end of the session, there will be a short time for questions and answers that I shall present to Katie and Pete from those with the most votes in the Q&A panel. We'll ensure that any other questions are responded to after today's event if we run out of time. Finally, we'd love you to complete the feedback form at the end of the presentation, please. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. We'll first hear from Professor Katy Angliss. Katy is Assistant Professor at the University of Warwick, and as an academic in the discipline of Programme and Project Management, has worked with many students and professionals, specialising in the area of multi-project and portfolio management. Prior to joining Warwick as a chartered engineer, Katy has over 20 years' experience working in project, programme and portfolio management, predominantly within telecommunications and utilities, including knowledge of new product introduction, working with portfolios of projects, leading large transformation programmes, and been involved with several strategic change projects, programmes and portfolios within different industrial sectors. We'll also hear from Professor Pete HARPUM. Pete is Affiliate Professor at Grenoble École de Management, Module Director and External Examiner at University College London, and visiting faculty for Portfolio, Programme and Project Management at the University of Warwick. Pete is editor of the standard reference text, Portfolio, Programme and Project Management in the Pharmaceutical and Biotechnology Industries, and has contributed to several other reference texts in the project management field. Pete's work as a partner-level management consultant is focused on helping organisations to successfully navigate major transformational change in how they deliver strategic objectives. Both Pete and Katy are authors of the forthcoming book, Strategic Portfolio Management in the Multi-Project and Programme Organisation. So with no further ado, Katy, that's over to you.
Okay, thanks, Matt, and hi everyone. And I believe it's after lunch, and we've got a lot to live up to after Steve and Jenna's session. But I hope you find our session interesting. And we're not going to get you to do anything too exciting after lunch. We're not going to give you any polls to do, but what we do ask is you think about whether what we're talking about here is relevant to the NHS, to your department, to your area, and how it would work. And the terminology we use is not necessarily as important as the framework, as what we're talking about, thinking about how it might work for yourselves. Okay, and what we're going to do today is go through strategic portfolios as complex adaptive systems. So here's the agenda. I'm going to set the scene looking at strategic portfolios and strategic portfolio management. You might not have heard the term before, but we're looking at that organisational perspective, that organisational view in delivering strategic objectives. And then Pete's going to pick up on some areas that link to this, one of those being strategic value and the other being organisational change, and then finishing up with complex adaptive systems and the portfolio. So here we are, if you like the pictures. Our key theme throughout this is viewing portfolio management from the organisational perspective. So where we have projects, programmes and portfolios along that continuum, and I've worked in this area for many years, what we're looking at is the link with the organisation being the portfolio, separated from the projects and programmes, rather than putting programmes and portfolios together with maybe thinking of projects separately. And that'll become clearer as we go through. So I'm going to be looking at strategic portfolio management, the why and the what, and strategic portfolios. And I'm not really going to cover the how, because we're covering the key areas of introduction at this point. The how is the portfolio management capabilities, which I'm unashamedly going to talk about the book. There's 28 chapters and a large section on portfolio management capabilities. And as I said, Pete's going to pick up on value and change, and finishing up with complex adaptive systems, and why you can think of strategic portfolios as a complex adaptive system. So I know this is going to be a theme of academic as well. I don't know how academic Stevens was, but there are some good texts on portfolio management, and particularly project portfolio management, but it is one of those developing areas. You might have seen that throughout the day. So not everybody agrees on portfolio management. But why are we talking about portfolio management? Well, many organisations, if not all organisations now, have multiple projects and programmes. Very few organisations only have one project, and that brings priorities being set between projects and programmes, capacity issues, resource and capability constraints. You might be thinking, oh yes, I've seen that. And whether that's complex programs, complex projects, mega projects, whatever your organisation, whether you don't have programs and you're delivering multiple projects, there is this area of portfolio management where you might be thinking, and if you're the portfolio manager, thinking about assuring delivery. So here, portfolio management being about delivering the strategy. There's lots written on developing a strategic intent, but less written on how to actually deliver that strategy. And here with portfolio management, that's what we're focusing on. And it brings about these questions on the right-hand side. So are projects and programs aligned? Are we continuously delivering? So portfolios, they're continuous rather than projects and programs perhaps being focused on one deliverable, one outcome, one objective. The portfolio is looking across the department, across the division, across the organisation. And then that brings in a key area of resource management. And then all those portfolio management capabilities, risk management and managing and visibility at the right level. And you can see here on the left-hand side, the diagram showing strategic portfolios, and perhaps you might have some tactical portfolios as well as all the change projects and programs that are happening throughout the business. So what we're looking at here is what is the strategic portfolio, and we're comparing it here to the 3 levels of strategy. So first reference here, Whittington et al. Looking at corporate strategy, and you can see the 3 levels of strategy there, and we're equating that to the 3 levels of portfolio. So you might have sub portfolios, you might have tactical portfolios, but you're going to have them at the different level, with the strategic portfolio encompassing, I believe you're calling it the corporate portfolio or the strategic portfolio at that wider level. And are we all aligned? Are we delivering? How are we delivering at the individual project and program level? So on the left-hand side here, what we're showing is the strategic portfolio actually needs to adapt to the changes. We're in an uncertain, complex, changing environment these days. No point in talking about COVID, you're all aware of that, but the next thing is coming along and it will change our strategy. And sometimes we have to pivot, sometimes we have to make small changes, but we have to adapt. And that strategic portfolio is adapting within your organisational environment, but on an ongoing life cycle linked to that strategic planning process. So here we are with just the strategic portfolio. diagram. So they're multi-leveled, and here for a good academic description here, we've got the definition of the strategic portfolio. And the important part here is we're including projects, programs, and other change activity. For example, and hopefully you're not at this point, but there might be some cost initiatives, and they're included within the business. And where I've seen programs delivering certain strategic objectives or direction or outcomes, and then we've got the improvement programs on top of that. Well, that's all part of the portfolio delivery. So most speakers, and I haven't seen Stephen Jenner's, so I don't know how this links in, but what we're saying here is, and quite often portfolio management is shown as the pillars. So here we've got the pillars, and this is my second reference with Lazar, the 4 pillars of agility, strategy, risk, and resources. Well, what we're saying here is strategic integration should be the key part, not just one of the pillars, and that projects and programs, they need to be delivered successfully. All your individual project and program success is critical for the portfolio success. But the portfolio is then looking and bringing the aggregated benefits into strategic value. And then with project, program, and change prioritization and allocation, the management of the portfolio within the processes and the ongoing strategic planning and delivery processes. And then resource management, risk management, part of portfolio management, and the organizational capabilities. And then energy, agility, whatever you'd like to call it, having a good integrated governance and assured delivery, because the portfolio isn't delivering projects and programs. The capable, competent project managers, program managers, you're delivering the projects and programs, but the portfolio is assuring that delivery. So we're looking now at that wider organizational environment and adopting the portfolio. And I just want to point out, I usually say this at the start, portfolio management is not new. So there's another couple of reference sources there to have a look at. Cooper there, new product introduction with portfolio management, and Pennypacker looking at project and portfolio maturity. But I won't talk any more about that. I'll leave you to perhaps do some search if you're interested afterwards. So to pull this together, before I hand over to Pete, some of the key points we're talking about here, and we are talking about in the forthcoming book, is viewing portfolio management from the organisational perspective in delivering strategic objectives. So assuring projects and programme delivery is key, integrated within the business, looking at that wider, pulling in all those other activities, and using the strategic portfolio with the strategic portfolio management capabilities for delivering the objectives. So I appreciate this is a high level view, and I'll leave you to read that afterwards as well. And you can see here that we're looking at understanding strategic portfolio management, looking at the organisational design for the strategic portfolio, and then expanding on portfolio management capabilities. I'm sure you can all read here. I'm not going to talk about these in any more depth, but the key points we're going to pull out, and there's some case studies here, but the key points that Pete is going to expand on now is that organisational change, and firstly strategic value, and then I'll be back to pull it all together with that complex adaptive system. So over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Katie. I'm not quite so linear as Katie. I wanted just to talk about some of the concepts first around value. So I think there are some kind of interesting ideas and statements we can make about value. And the first one being that it really only relatively recently resurfaced into the world of project thinking, which is quite interesting. It's really only in the last 10 years that there's been this reconsideration of, oh, projects are supposed to be delivering value, which is quite astonishing, really, in a way, if you think about it. However, to counter that, in the strategic business world, it's only about 5 years ago that academically the view has been, obviously from looking at business, the value creation actually as a concept hasn't really been applied or implemented very well in business, which is also quite interesting. So, in the 1980s, Michael Porter and others were talking about value chain, and yet in industry, from a strategic and portfolio project view, value is relatively recently being considered as a thing that needs to be implemented, how we create value. So that, I think that's an interesting place to start from the portfolio. And as Katie described, for us, the portfolio is about translating strategic objectives into projects and programs. And we'll see this diagram. I'm going to explain this diagram in a minute, but I want to say a few more things. But the diagram will pull all this together. I think another thing I want to say is in a broad and kind of a generic way, if you like, is that this is one of my little bugbears. We have to be very careful about the meaning of words. And the book quotes Wittgenstein, okay? So some of it's quite philosophical in the way we approach this. And this chapter is quite philosophical. In fact, so is the change chapter. But the point of this is that words have different meanings depending on the context they're being used in. And value is one of those words that can be particularly ambiguous or vague. And Peter Morris, who is one of the greats of project management academic world, talks about this vagueness of the meaning of value in one of the chapters in his last book, Deconstructing Project Management. So, I want us to think about and challenge, what do we mean by the word value? What do we mean by benefits? What do we mean by project and program? There is a chapter in the book that's kind of really full-on benefits chapter, which is by me and Carlos Serra, which follows this chapter on value. Why am I banging on about value? So value is an organisational construct. It's understood at the strategic level. It's what many would argue businesses, organisations, okay? Organisations exist to create, whether they're for-profit, not-for-profit, third sector, whatever they are, they're creating value. And here we go already, because what do we mean by value in that case? And I'll come to some definitions in a minute. Not too many, but they're worth just having a think about. So strategic objectives defined by value. And if the portfolio is going to connect the strategic objectives to the projects and programs that are going to deliver the value, then I think it's really important we understand how value works down through that system. And the literature and the research tends to show that actually there's a breakdown. And quite often where portfolios do exist, it breaks down the portfolio, and where they don't exist, it just dissipates. And there's this disconnect between strategic ideas of value and project and program benefit, because projects and programs typically don't talk about value. Side issue, in the UK, there's a view in many places that projects don't deliver benefits. Okay, only programs deliver benefits, which is another of those bizarre, in my opinion, bizarre ideas that a project doesn't deliver benefit. I mean, of course it does. So we get stuck into these words and these normative models of how things should be, and I want to challenge the thinking around that, because the way that we do portfolio management is contextually dependent, and it's hugely different depending on the sector and the objectives of the organization. There are some definitions of value that I hazard to say have probably never been used in the project management world. They may have been, but I haven't read it or heard it. And there are two kind of sets of definitions. One is looking at two ways of looking at value: hedonistic value and transcendent value. And hedonistic value means it's a relation, it's value by relation to other things. And transcendent value is the value to the self. So, this is quite interesting discussion for a business topic. But those ideas of value are understood quite often quite well in the strategic part of organisations, particularly the strategic part of the organisations that are responsible for delivering value to the market. Another way of looking at value, there's an equation I'm going to pull out of this, so this could be quite useful, is to look at four definitions of value, or four parts of value, sorry, which all combine. There's utility value, which is about the function of the thing, the utility value of a pencil as it writes. Okay, the exchange value, how much is a pencil worth when we sell it on the market? The symbolic value, my pencil's made of gold or it's made of wood. If I have a gold pencil, it has a higher symbolic value. And the sign value, which is what does this pen, gold pen or wooden pen, say about my status? Okay. Now, in the business world, quite often we can see value being defined as benefit minus cost, which is, again, we compare that how benefits defined in the project and program world, it's not quite the same. What's also confusing is that one can find definitions of value that say benefit minus cost. They're going to say benefit divided by cost. So we can't even agree on a really simple terms of what value actually means in terms of benefit and cost, but they're two different things. And I think that's value and benefit are two different things. I think that's worth holding on to. And so we can say, if we sit with benefit minus cost, instead of saying, well, we can define what are the components of benefit, what are the components of cost as utility value, exchange value, symbolic value, and sign value. And only one of those involves money. And exchange value might not even include money because it may be exchanged in some kind of barter. So this is starting to pull money out of the idea of value and for it being exclusively about money. So just to have a quick look then at this diagram, in a way, it kind of is at the heart of the book. And the idea here is that the strategic portfolio is not in contact with the market. The strategic portfolio is encompassing these three areas, because we can always argue about what we call the areas, how many areas there are, but we've got organisational development, mandatory work, and secure in the future. And those are fed by sub-portfolios of projects and programmes, which would include developing future strategy, process improvement, organisational change and transformation, come to that in a minute, and regulatory and legal compliance. And then secure in the future would be research and development, new product development, sustainability, as examples. None of those reach the market. Okay, the outcomes of those things impacting on the operations world, which is the lower blue box on the right, where the stuff is actually made that we're going to take to the market. Now, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, whatever it is, that's how we differentiate operations from the strategic portfolio and the sub-portfolios. Operations can have tactical portfolios. So I'm sorry about these different portfolios, but this is just a reflection in real life. You won't see BAU on here, business as usual. In my opinion, it's a non sequitur. It doesn't exist. We call it operations because it's the operational part of the business. It's making the stuff we deliver. The strategic portfolio is improving the way the organisation does the things it delivers. It's also improving that part of the organisation that gets those things to the market. And you can see these two value improvement arrows coming from the strategic portfolio, plus the sources of future value. So that could be new products. And that would be feeding into the operations, because a new product doesn't reach the market until it's become part of operations. All right, because we're not selling prototypes, probably. So that gives you this kind of internal structure around the strategic portfolio and how it fits together with the market, what separates it, and how it impacts on operations. And we can see then the kind of the circle of value that comes from the market, or is achieved by getting to the market, we get, again, it doesn't have to be money, but we get a value returned. Some of it might go to, if it's a commercial organisation, a for-profit, the value might go to some of the shareholders. Some of it is going to be absorbed in operating costs, and some of it's going to be retained for investment. And that's how we're separating out the return of value into the organisation, into the strategic portfolio, because that's part of the, that's how we're going to achieve the strategic objectives, through retained value. And then just to get towards finishing off the diagram, at the bottom, we can see how the benefits accrue. In fact, Katie said it just earlier, benefits accruing through the projects and programs into the sub-portfolios, into the strategic portfolio, and then they're operationalized in operations. Makes sense. One thing that we have put on here, just to make it clear, the little cloud down on the bottom right, is to say that operations could be, if you're a construction company or an IT software company, or if you make products in a project environment, that's operations, right? And this can sometimes get a bit confusing. But if you're a construction company and you build buildings, then that's operations for you, okay? So if we just go on to the next slide then, thank Katie. So that was value. I just want to talk quickly about, one eye on the time, organisational change. So this is a very exploratory chapter in the book. We bring in lots of different ideas about change from various different perspectives. And we review those themes. And this is really about asking the reader and all of you to think about what we mean by change in the portfolio and project and programme context. And there's an implication that portfolio management has a direct role to play in organisational change. We'll just go over again, Katie. The motivation, it really came from this idea that I've seen this in quite a lot of places now, that the word project is being replaced by change. That we deliver change, we make change happen, and everything's about change. And I think there's a real danger in that, actually, because in one sense, it's very obvious. Projects deliver change. I mean, that's what they do. But it then becomes conflated with organisational change. And what we see is that to some extent, the organisational change then becomes misunderstood as a very instrumentalist approach, and it becomes the plan change. And sometimes people say, well, we've got some emergent change as well. Great, this is all very instrumentalist, irrespective. And what I don't see enough of is deep thinking. What are we really trying to change here? Because organisational change is about people. Quick example, Lewin is always quoted as saying, unfreeze, change, refreeze. Well, Lewin never said that, actually. If you go look at what Lewin said, he didn't say that. And yet everyone says that's what he said. And so, I think it's worth challenging these shibboleths. And that the portfolio is by definition, a change portfolio is by definition just another portfolio. And so it's about understanding the context for that portfolio. And again, Katie. So really it's just the second bullet point here, and perhaps the third. One of the key ways that the portfolio can influence how well organisational change and transformation is enacted is through the decision criteria that allow entry into the portfolio of the change and transformation projects and programs. And the decision criteria have to be set according to strategic objectives. Again, that's a chapter on its own, okay? But for instance, one of the criteria might be, we must have expert input, because you'd expect in every other part of the organisation. So we need expert input into organisational change and transformation. Where the organisational psychologists and how are they co-opted into the portfolio. All right, again, just keep my eye on the time.
Next one.
Yes, please, sorry. Yeah. some of the perspectives on change that I just mentioned, okay, I picked out 5 of the common ones. The ideas about how we think about change in the modern and postmodern thinking. So what's reality? What's the truth? And how do we engage in that when we're thinking about organisational change? The classical view, Taylor, Fail, the scientific rational view of change. The human relations approach, which is exemplified by the Tavistock. I don't see much of this in change transformation in the project world, okay? If you go into the world of HR, you're much more likely to come across it, organisational development and learning. Contingency theory, which was Lawrence and Lorsch, which is interesting because Lawrence and Lorsch really were at the very beginning, they were used as one of the key starters for theorising about projects. So there's a strong connection there. And cultural excellence models, Peters and Waterman you'll have heard of, and Charles Handy. So these are areas to go to. I think the notes we've put up have some more details on this. So if quickly go over again, Katie. Here's a specific example of a tool that one can use from the Human Relations School that can be used specifically at the portfolio about looking at how do we manage the change that we want to achieve. And this is about looking at, it's called the Bart Framework. What's the boundary for our portfolio? What's the container? What's the time boundary? What are the tasks? What's the territory? Literally the territory involved. And this can help us to understand better the boundaries around which we're trying to work. Who has the authority? Excuse me, literally who has the authority to make decisions? Who has authority to deliver? What are the roles and how clear are we about them and the authority associated with the roles, and being very clear about the task. And interestingly, from the Human Relations School, the task has never been done before, which has this kind of relation to the uniqueness of projects. And I think pretty much lastly from me, but just the next slide, Katie, is again, the more detail of this is available in the slides, but to think about how the portfolio can be and impact on complex adaptive systems. So this is Drive for Fitness, which is fundamentally about where are we now and where we're trying to get to, and how does the portfolio understand that gap? And it's a strategic question, right? It's not aligning projects, it's not aligning projects and programs to the strategy, right? You don't need to align them because they shouldn't be in the portfolio if they weren't aligned in the first place. So there's a divergence here from me on a lot of the normative models. But that gap comes with the Drive for Fitness. The diversity of views, portfolio has a very good opportunity to ensure that the right views get brought in to the way that decision-making has to be made around decision criteria and ongoing monitoring and allocation of resources. I mean, it's a big book, right? It's 500 pages, so there's a lot to cover. Connectivity and safety and edge of chaos control are all issues that are well understood in complex adaptive system theory, and they're all applicable at the portfolio. Safety, interestingly, is about psychological safety. How do we let people make difficult decisions, make mistakes, and still be safe for them to do that? So I think, yeah, are you talking to this, Katie, or me?
Okay, so I think this brings us, I think we're both looking at the time and seeing Matt here. So, so complex adaptive systems, what we're doing is we're bringing it back, as Pete said, it's not straightforward, it's complex, you already know that, and it's how we organise ourselves as well as organising projects and programmes and change activities, and that the strategic portfolio is part of that. So in summary, for the strategic portfolio, it is continuously delivering the strategic objective and strategic value. It's not finite, it adapts, and this is where the complex adaptive system it adapts in that uncertain environment, and it's integrated, it's multi-layered, and it encompasses all the project, programme and change activities. So here, the quote, the components of a complex adaptive system can be adapted and used as the basis for reflection on and design of the portfolio organisation. So it's thinking about the organisational design that is relevant for the portfolio. It isn't the be all and end all, we're not saying that. It isn't the most important thing, but strategic portfolios can help to successfully deliver. And a note here about strategic portfolio management capabilities. There's lots more to talk about on that, but we're not covering that today. So I hope you found this useful and a lot of food for thought. If nothing else, I hope it resonates with you somewhere. So thanks, Matt. Is that timing?
That seems perfect to me. You aimed for 2:05 and you've hit it pretty much to the second thing. So thank you very much. That was an excellent 35 minutes, I think, going through that. And you mentioned Steve Jenner a couple of times there, Katie. I think this is very complementary to what Steve was talking about. Steve was talking about more of the operational delivery of the value, the benefits of portfolios, and you've looked at the strategic level. So I think the two link together very nicely. We've got some questions to take you through. I'll start with the one with the most votes, which is, how would you structure portfolio governance across a multi-organisation portfolio?
Sounds like yours, Katie.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk through a whole chapter here. There's, and I know the chapter, and I'm probably going to get told off by David Dunning here because he's much more of the expert on this than I am. But structuring it as the portfolio delivery group and portfolio development group. So thinking about it in two different ways. With the portfolio, you've got to achieve those delivery parts, but perhaps with it's also about the development. And it's aligning that with the strategy, with the business processes. So we could probably expand on this, and I'm sure there's others who could expand better on this. But I hope that gives you an idea of where we're coming from. We call it governance and assurance, because it's assuring projects and programs. So it's having the key people in where you need them. Who are those responsible, but not getting down into managing those projects and programs, because that's not the portfolio's responsibility.
Can I add just a bit there, Katie? I think actually what you said was really helpful for me. Quickly there, in any decent sized strategic portfolio, we would be looking for two parts, an upper and a lower, if you like, hierarchical, and the upper hierarchical bit, if you like, is interacting with the strategic part of the organisation, maybe strategic planning, maybe with the senior directors. So at that level, and figuring out and having this connection about what's coming in, and feeding back information about what's actually achievable and what's possible. And so, there's some assurance element there, but interestingly, you're assuring strategy. You're assuring strategy in a way. And then the lower part, hierarchically, the lower part of the portfolio is actually the kind of operational part, where what you might call the normal expectation of governance might be happening around how projects and programs run. How do we put them through a stage gate process? How do we make sure that we're applying the correct decision criteria to projects and programs that enter the portfolio, et cetera, et cetera. So again, totally context dependent. But I think separating those two into an upper and a lower section in the portfolio can be very useful, actually. That's it.
Hopefully that helps.
Katie, go on.
We're waiting for the next question.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So next question. If we have a civil service department that brings in change through policy that may include legislative changes, how do we value this in strategic portfolios or complex adaptive systems?
The first place I'd be doing is going to the policymakers and asking them how they've defined the value of the policy that they want to be imposed. Or imposed, embedded, implemented. And again, this is interesting because in other sectors, this is where things break down. that the values that the organisation, the way they're defining value is poorly understood, poorly communicated. There may be those two things together. So the portfolio and then the projects and the programs fail to truly understand, and I think this is probably where your question is coming from, fail to truly understand what is the measure or measures of value we're trying to achieve. I don't think you can define it. I think you have to get it from the strategic decision makers. Where's the policy come from? There must be a value that's been assigned to the achievement of the policy outcome. So that's where it has to be defined. Otherwise, you're trying to redefine something without sufficient knowledge, I would say.
Anything to add, Katie?
Yeah, following on from that, I think understanding the value, the rationale for it always helps in terms of knowing what you're trying to deliver, what you're trying to achieve. And this will be as part of the portfolio. So it's unlikely to be the only, if you could term it, a project to successfully implement the policy. It's not going to be the only thing that's happening. And again, you're going to have some priorities around that. So do you feel that where are you setting the importance of this policy, understanding what needs to be delivered through the value? But it's part of the overall portfolio, and all these aspects are going to be different. So they might not be connected. I mean, typically, and I'm only generalizing here with definitions of programs, but programs have projects that tend to be connected, affect each other's delivery. But in a portfolio, you might have one project or program that's totally disconnected from another project and program, or policy as a policy implementation project. But they're both as equally important to achieve. So I think it's part of the portfolio.
I think that takes us nicely into the next question, actually. Looking across a portfolio, the question is, how do you recommend that benefits of a transformational change, for example, are attributed accordingly when realised across organisations, and so double counting is avoided?
That's exactly what the portfolio governance and assurance should be looking at. And that's where you typically get it if projects and programs are delivering independently from this portfolio direction. And this is part of what we're looking at here with the portfolio, is trying to bring that together and say, well, that's being accounted for there, so shouldn't be double counted for elsewhere. And it happens. I'm totally getting where you're coming from there.
The chapter 7 with me and Carlos Sarah talks about benefits realization management, and we talk about this issue a little bit. I mean, fundamentally, it's about good business process and business performance. And one of the things about that is going to the organisation and getting people to agree what part of the benefits they will have accrued to them. I mean, it sounds blindingly obvious, but I get it, it's difficult. But if we understand who's going to receive the benefits upfront and it's laid out and it's tracked, it really should make it much easier. It is a good point. It's a good question. I know it happens. But I think a really good benefits realization management process, properly applied with a lot of stakeholder management going on and engagement, is going to get you most of the way there.
Communication and planning, as is often the answer in 2 words. Chris, got time for one more question. Your definition of a portfolio covered all change. Can less value-adding change exist outside the portfolio? An example, I'm thinking of the 3 zones of the earlier session, and also the comment about not measuring everything.
Do you want to pick that one up, Pete?
Yeah, no. That's the answer. Strategic portfolio is the business, is the book of work of the business. Everything that happens in the business happens, all the strategic work that happens in the business is in the strategic portfolio. So if you're trying to achieve strategic objectives, it's in the strategic portfolio. If it's not a strategic objective, it sounds like there was a kind of a small, relatively tactical project or program. It's in a tactical portfolio, but the tactical portfolio is still in the big business book of work. So no work exists outside the business book of work, kind of by definition, really.
Okay, thank you very much. I found that session and the Q&A absolutely fascinating. So thank you, certainly from me, and I'm sure from everybody else as well. Thank you, Katie and Pete. For interest, the next session is at 2:30 in 15 minutes, and where the PMO Software Special Interest Group will be talking about PMO software and how it's changing the way we report our projects, programs, and portfolios. So it just leaves me to say thank you to all the guests and to our speakers, and goodbye.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks all. Goodbye. Hope you enjoyed the session.